The Sky Dragon falls. On February 1, 1966, U.S. Navy Lieutenant Dieter Dengler was flying his first combat mission, a secret strike over Laos in a Douglas A-1 Sky Raider. Anti-aircraft fire ripped through his aircraft, forcing him to crash land deep within territory controlled by the Pathet Lao. For the German-born pilot whose childhood dream of flying brought him to America, the dream had turned into a nightmare. After evading capture for a day, he was apprehended by Laotian soldiers. Dengler was brutally tortured, dragged behind a water buffalo, and subjected to mock executions. His captors wanted him to sign a document condemning the United States. He refused. After weeks of abuse, he was marched for nearly a month through the suffocating jungle to a prison camp hidden in the village of Pa Kung. There, he met 6 other prisoners, fellow American pilot Dwayne W. Martin, 2 other Americans, and several Thai and Chinese civilians who had fallen into Pathet Lao hands. The camp sat in a mountain valley, invisible beneath triple canopy jungle. Bamboo huts with thatched roofs clustered around a central clearing. No barbed wire, no guard towers. The Pathet Lao needed none. The jungle itself was the prison. 1,000 square miles of green death where leeches drained blood, mosquitoes carried malaria, and tigers hunted at night. Guards led Dengler through the clearing, past prisoners who stared with hollow eyes from skeletal frames. These men looked dead already. Their ribs pressed against taut skin, flies crawled on open sores. One prisoner squatted near a hut, too weak to stand, his legs swollen with beriberi. The guards shoved Dengler into a 6-foot square bamboo hut. Inside, 6 men sat shackled in darkness. Dwayne Martin, an Air Force helicopter pilot shot down the previous September, introduced himself in a whisper. His voice was flat, devoid of hope. Gene de Bruin, a CIA contract pilot, had been captive since September 1963. YC-2 and Pisidi Indradat, Thai civilians who had worked for Air America, sat silent against the wall. 2 Chinese civilians completed the group. All wore the same iron shackles, feet locked in wooden stocks at night. The guards fastened a 5-foot wooden bar through Dengler's ankle shackles. When he moved, the prisoner shackled to the other end moved too. Privacy ceased to exist. Dignity was the first casualty. The stocks came at sunset. Guards forced the 7 men onto the bamboo floor, locking their ankles into crude wooden devices that held their feet immobile until dawn. Sleep became torture, muscles cramped, circulation stopped, men groaned through the darkness. Food arrived twice daily in a battered tin pot. Rice, sometimes a few vegetables. The portion for 7 men would barely sustain 2. Each prisoner received half a tin cup. Dengler counted 43 grains of rice in his first meal. Hunger was immediate and absolute. Within days, his flight suit hung loose. Within weeks, his belt could wrap twice around his shrinking waist. The other prisoners showed him what starvation looked like after months. De Bruin's cheekbones jutted like broken glass beneath papery skin. Martin's wrists were thin as bamboo shoots. The Thai civilians had stopped speaking, conserving energy their bodies no longer possessed. Guards spoke Lao and broken Vietnamese. None spoke English. They communicated through violence. A rifle butt to the ribs meant move faster. A bamboo rod across the shoulders meant show respect. A boot to the head meant nothing at all, just casual cruelty to break time's monotony. The camp commander, a Pathet Lao political officer, visited weekly to deliver propaganda lectures the prisoners couldn't understand. He demanded they sign confessions. They refused. He reduced their rations. Dengler noticed details the other prisoners had stopped seeing. The guards changed shifts at irregular intervals, no set pattern. The youngest guard, barely 16, sometimes left his AK-47 leaning against a tree while he smoked. The camp's ammunition supply sat in an open bamboo structure, no lock. The guards kept machetes near the cooking fire, tools for cutting bamboo and clearing jungle. At night, only 2 guards stayed awake, and they spent most of their time near the fire, smoking and talking, rarely patrolling. The jungle pressed close. Dengler could hear it breathing. Cicadas shrieked at dusk. Monkeys howled at dawn. Something large moved through the undergrowth each night, perhaps a tiger or wild boar. The guards feared the jungle too. They never ventured far from camp. Even when they escorted work details to cut bamboo or gather firewood, they stayed within sight of the clearing. Beyond the village perimeter, the jungle was unmapped wilderness stretching to Thailand, perhaps 40 miles west. No roads, no trails the guards would follow. Days blurred into routine horror. Wake at dawn when guards unlocked the stocks. Receive morning rice. Sit shackled in the hut during monsoon rains that turned the clearing to mud. Afternoon work details, prisoners still shackled together in pairs, shuffling to collect firewood or repair huts. Evening rice. Stocks locked at sunset. Darkness. Pain. Fitful sleep. Repeat. Dengler watched the other prisoners deteriorate. De Bruin had developed a 1,000-yard stare, present in body but absent in spirit. The Thai civilians had stopped eating their full rations, saving scraps for later that never came. Only Martin seemed to retain some spark, some stubborn refusal to surrender completely. They whispered at night when guards couldn't hear. Martin described his shoot-down, the months of interrogation, the mock execution where guards had placed a pistol to his head and pulled the trigger on an empty chamber. His hands still shook when he spoke of it. The guards celebrated something in late February. They roasted a pig, drank rice wine, fired their weapons into the air. The prisoners received no extra food. They sat shackled in their hut, smelling roasted meat, while their stomachs cramped with hunger. One of the Chinese civilians wept silently. De Bruin stared at the wall. Dengler studied the celebrating guards, counting weapons, noting who drank most heavily, watching who became careless. March brought heavier rains. The hut leaked. Water pooled on the bamboo floor. The prisoners sat in wet filth, unable to stay dry. Skin rotted. Sores opened and refused to heal. Infection was constant. The guards provided no medical care. When one Thai civilian developed a fever, they simply moved him to a separate hut to die alone. He lasted 3 days. The guards buried him in a shallow grave outside camp. No ceremony, no acknowledgement, just one less mouth to feed. Dengler's weight dropped below 100 pounds. His ribs stood out like ladder rungs. His knees were knobs on stick legs, but his mind remained sharp. He memorized every detail, guard routines, weapon locations, the paths they took into the jungle, the direction of water sounds that meant a stream, the angle of sunlight that indicated west. He studied the shackles, primitive locks that could be picked with a nail or sharpened stick. He watched how stocks were constructed, noticing one set had a crack in the wood that weakened the structure. Martin noticed Dengler's attention. At night, lying in stocks, Martin whispered questions. Had Dengler flown over this area before? Did he know the terrain west toward Thailand? How far to the Mekong River? Dengler didn't know, but he understood what Martin was asking. Not if they could escape, but when they would try. The question shifted something in the hut. De Bruin stopped staring at walls. The remaining Thai civilian began eating his full rations again. Even the Chinese prisoners seemed to straighten slightly. The Pathet Lao commander visited again in mid-March. He brought documents. Through gestures and broken phrases, he demanded signatures. The Americans would confess to war crimes. They would denounce American imperialism. They would broadcast propaganda over Radio Hanoi. In exchange, better food, medical care, perhaps eventual release. De Bruin had heard these promises before, empty words designed to break resistance. They all refused again. Rations decreased further. Now each prisoner received perhaps 30 grains of rice twice daily, barely 200 calories. Starvation accelerated. Bodies consumed themselves. Muscles disappeared first, then organs began failing. Men moved in slow motion, conserving every ounce of energy. Speech decreased, thoughts became sluggish. Death was arriving on schedule, patient and certain, but something else was arriving too, something the guards couldn't see. Dengler had found a 3-inch nail hidden in the hut's bamboo floor, left by some previous prisoner or dropped by a careless guard. At night, he worked it against the lock on his shackles, feeling the crude mechanism's weaknesses. The locks were simple, designed to be opened quickly by guards with keys. They could also be opened by a determined man with a nail and time. Dengler had time. He had nothing but time and a growing certainty that waiting meant dying. Martin whispered plans in darkness. If they could free themselves from shackles, if they could reach the guards' weapons, if they could move fast before the camp reacted, they might reach the jungle. Once in the jungle, they would run west toward Thailand. 40 miles through unmapped wilderness with no food, no water, no compass, pursued by guards who knew the terrain. The odds were impossible, but the odds of surviving captivity were worse. Every prisoner in the hut was dying by degrees, starving in increments, fading toward graves in the jungle soil. The nail bit deeper into the lock mechanism. Dengler worked it carefully, learning each tumbler, each catch. The shackle opened one night in April. He closed it again immediately, testing his ability to free himself quickly when the moment came. Martin watched with eyes that had rediscovered hope, that dangerous thing that could sustain a man or break him when it failed. They needed a plan. They needed coordination. They needed every prisoner committed, because hesitation would mean death for all. Dengler studied the guards through April's heat and rain. The youngest guard, the careless one, would be their first target. The weapons cache would be their second. The jungle would be their salvation or their grave. He counted days by scratches on the bamboo wall, marking time until his body would be too weak to run, too depleted to fight. The window was closing. Starvation was winning its slow war. They had weeks left, perhaps only days, before their bodies crossed the threshold from which no recovery was possible. The guards watched them starve with bureaucratic indifference, certain the jungle and hunger would kill what violence had failed to break. But Dieter Dengler had survived the firebombing of Germany as a child, had crossed an ocean to chase an impossible dream, had refused to sign confessions under torture. He would not die shackled in bamboo darkness. The nail turned in the lock. The plan formed in whispers. The countdown had begun. Chapter 2. The Bamboo Cage. The prison camp at Pa Kung was a study in primitive cruelty. In a single bamboo hut, 7 prisoners were held, their hands often bound. At night, their feet were locked into a long wooden footstock that made sleep impossible and escape unthinkable. The guards, mostly teenagers armed with aging rifles, were cruel and unpredictable. The diet was a starvation ration of rotting rice, sometimes with a snake or rat thrown in, and the men were plagued by leeches, mosquitoes, and dysentery. Bodies wasted away. Dengler, who crashed at 157 pounds, withered to under 100. He witnessed the guards' casual brutality and overheard them discussing shooting the prisoners once the food ran out. It was clear that staying in the camp meant a certain slow death. The first morning roll call was a lesson in survival. Before dawn, guards yanked the prisoners from their footstocks, shouting in Lao and broken English. Lined up outside, they swayed on weakened legs. The commander, a man nicknamed Little Hitler for his oversized pith helmet, inspected them. He stopped at Dwayne Martin, an Air Force pilot with a visible fever. Little Hitler screamed something in Lao, then struck Martin across the face with his rifle butt. Martin dropped to his knees. The commander kicked him twice in the ribs, methodically, then moved on as the other guards laughed. Martin climbed back to his feet, blood streaming from his split lip, and rejoined the line. Nobody helped him. Nobody spoke. Lesson 1 was clear. Sickness earned punishment, not mercy. Showing weakness invited violence. After roll call came hard labor. The guards marched them into the jungle to cut bamboo for a new barracks. Though their hands were untied for the work, rifles were always trained on them. Dengler quickly noted the teenage guards were undisciplined, often smoking and talking in the shade. Their carelessness was deceptive, however. A prisoner moving too slowly would be met with a sudden swinging rifle butt. This unpredictable violence was more terrifying than constant brutality. Dengler learned to work steadily, never appearing rushed, his head down but his awareness scanning the guards' positions. Watching Martin endure his pain without complaint, Dengler understood that quiet endurance was currency here. The work was designed to keep them weak, burning calories they couldn't spare and reinforcing their powerlessness. The evening rice distribution revealed the camp's hierarchy of desperation. A guard ladled watery rice from a single pot into 7 bowls. The portions were never equal. An unspoken system had formed where the weakest ate first, but when YC2, a Chinese contractor, tried to swap his watery bowl for a thicker one, the guards noticed. They dumped all 7 bowls onto the dirt floor and beat 2 with bamboo rods until he collapsed. Leaving the spilled rice in the mud, they walked away. The prisoners had no choice. They scraped the gritty paste from the ground and ate it, dirt and all. Swallowing what felt like poison, Dengler knew pride was a suicidal luxury. He saw the guards watching with satisfaction. They wanted to turn their prisoners into animals, making them easier to dispose of later. By the 3rd week, Dengler's body was a catalogue of failure. His flight suit hung like rags on a scarecrow. His ribs protruded so sharply that lying on the bamboo floor opened cuts that wouldn't heal. Constant dysentery forced him to the latrine pit a dozen times a day, while guards mocked him. His hands, bound for most of the day, lost feeling in the fingers. Worse was watching the others collapse. Pisidi Indradat, a Thai contractor, had stopped speaking, moving like a man underwater. Eugene De Bruin, a quiet American, tried to encourage him, but Pisidi was disappearing inside himself. Dengler realized starvation didn't just consume the body, it ate the mind first, hollowing out the will, leaving just enough consciousness to suffer. After 2 months, the camp's rhythms were grimly familiar. Dengler could tell time by the guard rotations, the energetic morning shift, the lazy afternoon guards, and the dangerously bored night shift. He learned to exploit their weaknesses. One teenage boy with a limp always took the same post, creating a blind spot. Another guard, nicknamed Crazy, was unstable but afraid of snakes and could be distracted by a noise in the brush. Dengler absorbed these details without a conscious plan, his pilot's mind instinctively processing information, building mental maps, and noticing patterns. Despite being starved and beaten, his mind still worked that way. Dwayne Martin became Dengler's closest ally through actions, not words. The helicopter pilot possessed survival skills the Navy flyer lacked. During work details, Martin would snatch edible leaves or show Dengler a specific vine that, when cut, released drinkable water. He taught him to trap lizards on the hut walls, snapping their necks silently and eating them raw at night for extra protein. Martin also shared intelligence in whispers. The Pathet Lao were stretched thin in the region. The guards were barely trained local militia, and the camp's real purpose was to let the prisoners die, saving the trouble of a formal execution. Rumors of prisoners being marched to Hanoi for propaganda didn't apply here. Pa Kung wasn't important enough. They were forgotten men, and that fact was a death sentence. Death came in the 4th month. Prasit Promsuwan, another Thai contractor, had been declining faster than the others, his dysentery uncontrollable. One morning he couldn't stand for roll call. The guards dragged him outside anyway and counted him where he lay. He died that afternoon while the others were at work. When they returned, his body lay covered in flies. The guards made them carry him into the jungle and bury him in a shallow grave, using only their hands and pieces of bark. As he scraped dirt over the body, Dengler felt a terrifying numbness. He had become immune to horror. The guards' indifference confirmed his deepest fear. They were simply waiting for the food to run out before disposing of the rest of them. But something shifted in Dengler after the burial. That night, locked in the footstocks, his mind started working differently. He stopped seeing the camp as a prison and started seeing it as a machine with exploitable weaknesses. The hut's bamboo walls were secured by simple wire loops that could be worked loose. The stocks were held by wooden pegs that might be removed. The guards' rifles were old French and American models. Most importantly, the guards themselves were the weak point. Their routines were predictable. Their vigilance waned in the heat, and they were terrified of the jungle at night, believing in spirits. Dengler had seen them refuse to pursue a prisoner who wandered off at dusk, instead just firing warning shots until the man returned on his own. The following week, on a work detail, Dengler saw the key to escape. The guards marched to them further than usual to a supply clearing. There, among crates and covered poorly with palm fronds, sat two motorcycles. They were old French military bikes, but clearly maintained and functional. One had keys hanging from the ignition. The guards used them for running messages to a larger Pathet Lao position deeper in the jungle. Dengler absorbed every detail. Their position, the fact the clearing was only guarded by day, the sound of their engines. He had flown complex aircraft through enemy fire. He could operate a motorcycle. The problem wasn't the machine, but getting to it with a sufficient head start. That night, Dengler whispered to Martin. He didn't propose a plan, just asked a question. How long would it take to reach that supply clearing? Martin was quiet before whispering back. 20 minutes through the jungle if you knew the way, but running at night was suicide. A broken leg or the noise would give them away. Dengler agreed. Running wasn't the answer. They needed to leave in a way that bought them hours, not minutes. Martin understood immediately. Escape would have to be during a daylight work detail, when the guards were lazy and the bikes accessible. It would require the cooperation of all the other prisoners to create a distraction, and they would need to seize the guards' rifles because entering the jungle unarmed was just a slower form of death. The plan was forming, though neither man spoke the word escape aloud. Dengler's determination crystallized. The Pathet Lao expected them to die passively, and that was a fatal mistake. Dengler still had his pilot's mind for calculating odds. Martin had his jungle skills. Together, they could think strategically, a capacity their captors couldn't imagine in starving prisoners. The others would need to be brought into the plan carefully, as desperation made men unpredictable. Some might refuse out of fear. One premature move could doom them all. But Dengler knew the alternative was certain. He had watched Promsuan die and felt his own body fail. The Pathet Lao would eventually march them into the jungle to be shot, or simply let them starve. The only question was whether they would die passively or die trying to reach freedom. For Dengler, there was no choice. He had survived everything else. He would survive this or die in motion. The motorcycles were there, the guards were lazy, and the jungle could hide them. What remained was timing, planning, and the courage to act when the moment came. Chapter 3. The Breaking Point. After months of slow starvation, the breaking point arrived with the monsoon rains. The prisoners overheard their guards planning to kill them and return to their home villages for the rice harvest. A timeline for their execution had been set. Dengler's skeletal frame went rigid against the bamboo wall of the hut. Just outside, the Pathet Lao guards spoke in low voices, assuming the prisoners understood nothing. They were wrong. Dengler had spent weeks absorbing fragments of Lao, enough to piece together the essential truth. The guards were not professional soldiers, but rather farmers conscripted into service, exhausted by maintaining this remote jungle prison. With the rice planting season beginning, their families needed them. The prisoners were an expenditure of food and manpower they could no longer afford. Their discussions centered not on whether to kill the Americans, but when and how. A bullet was expensive. Perhaps machetes would be more practical. The casual tone of their planning sent ice through Dengler's veins despite the oppressive heat. This was no longer a theoretical threat, it was a schedule. They had 2 weeks, maybe 3 at most, before the guards resolved to finish them and disappear into the mountains. The monsoon that drummed ceaselessly on the thatched roof had brought this deadline. His body, reduced to sinew and bone after months subsisting on handfuls of rice and occasional grubs, trembled not from weakness, but from the adrenaline of absolute clarity. Passive survival meant certain execution. Action meant probable death, but possible escape. The calculation was simple. Everything changed in that moment of comprehension. The fog of starvation that had dulled his mind burned away. Lieutenant Dieter Dengler, United States Navy pilot, shot down over Laos during a classified mission, stopped being a victim waiting to die and became an operator planning to live. His eyes, once accustomed to staring blankly through the gaps in the bamboo, now observed everything with renewed purpose. The transformation was immediate and total. Where before he had seen only the grinding mechanics of captivity, he now saw exploitable patterns, measurable routines, and tactical opportunities. The guards numbered 7, rotating in shifts of 3 or 4. They carried aging American M1 rifles captured from previous conflicts, and one prized French MAT-49 submachine gun that the senior guard jealously controlled. They were villagers on an unwanted duty, far from their families. Though a prisoner for 4 months, only now did Dengler truly see them as individuals. The young one picked his teeth constantly and dozed during the afternoon. The older guard with the limp moved slowly, favouring his left leg. The one who brought their rice was methodical but lazy, dumping the bowls and retreating immediately to avoid the stench. Most critically, Dengler observed their midday routine with the intensity of a predator. Around noon each day, when the jungle heat became suffocating, the on-duty guards would gather under a lean-to shelter adjacent to the prisoner hut. Squatting in a circle, they shared their rice and dried fish. Their attention focused entirely on their meal and conversation for 20 to 30 minutes. Their weapons, the M1s and the coveted MAT-49, would be propped against the bamboo supports of the shelter, just feet away, but critically unguarded. In their minds, starving men who could barely stand posed no threat. This complacency was the crack in their security. Dengler's mind, trained in escape and evasion at the Navy's survival school, catalogued the vulnerability with clinical precision. The weapons were unattended for a measurable window. The hut's door, a crude assembly of lashed bamboo, could be broken with a sudden rush. The jungle began just 30 meters from the camp perimeter. If they could get their hands free, break out during that lunchtime window, and seize weapons, they might have a few precious seconds to disappear before the guards could react. It was desperate and dangerous, but it was possible. Dengler could not do this alone. His body, withered to perhaps 90 pounds from his normal 155, lacked the strength. He needed allies among his fellow prisoners, men who could still move, still fight, and still believe escape was worth dying for. This was the greater challenge. The other prisoners had been captive far longer, some for over a year. They were more than physically broken. Their minds had retreated into protective shells of hopelessness, resigned to waiting for either release or death with equal indifference. 6 other prisoners shared the hut, kept in stocks by day and bound by night. 3 were Thai, captured when their CIA-contracted aircraft went down. 2 were Chinese irregulars, anti-communist fighters ensnared in the guerrilla war consuming Laos. And then there was Dwayne Martin, a fellow American, an Air Force pilot shot down months before Dengler. Martin had watched men die in this camp. He had been beaten, tortured with red ants, and starved to the edge of death only to endure more. His eyes held the flat affect of a man who had accepted his fate. Dengler began working on Martin first, using careful whispers when the guards were distant. The risk was enormous. One informer trading information for an extra bowl of rice would mean a death sentence for them all. Dengler watched Martin's face as he laid out what he had heard. The execution, the timeline, the choice that was no choice at all. Martin's eyes stayed dead for a long moment. Then something flickered. Not hope exactly, but recognition. An acknowledgement that since death was certain, choosing how to meet it was the only freedom remaining. "They'll kill us if we try," Martin whispered back, his voice hoarse from disuse. "They'll kill us if we don't," Dengler replied. "At least this way we go down fighting. Maybe we make it, probably we don't. But I'd rather die in the jungle than on my knees waiting for a machete." Martin's jaw tightened. Something in him, a core of identity that had survived captivity, responded to the logic. He was an Air Force pilot. He had sworn an oath. He had a duty to resist. The fog of resignation began to lift. He nodded once, a tiny movement that meant everything. Dengler had his ally. Together, they worked on the others over several days. The Thai prisoners listened, tempted but terrified. One shook his head firmly. It was too risky. The language barrier made detailed planning with the non-committal Chinese fighters impossible. Martin and Dengler would be the core, 2 American pilots, trained to escape, both out of time. Dengler's hands, bound each night with rattan cord, became his focus. The guards tied the bindings tight, but not expertly. He began testing the knots with microscopic movements, flexing his wrists. His skeletal fingers, though weak, retained dexterity. He discovered that by angling his hands just so, he could create enough space to loosen the binding fractionally. With minutes of agonizing effort, he could work his hands loose. He practiced every night, building muscle memory, timing himself. 8 minutes, 7, 6, if he ignored the pain of the rattan cutting into his flesh. Martin worked his own bindings using the same technique, and they compared notes in whispers. They refined their method, discovering that dampening the rattan with saliva made it more pliable. They memorized the tying pattern each guard used. This was the groundwork for action. Everything depended on timing, on the convergence of opportunity and readiness. Dengler observed the guards' midday ritual with obsessive attention. He measured the distances with a pilot's eye, 4 meters from their door to the weapons, another 28 to the tree line. The guards typically ate for 25 minutes. If he and Martin could slip their bindings in under 6 minutes, they could use their combined weight to burst through the door, cover the 4 meters, seize the weapons, and open fire to create shock and chaos. It might grant them the seconds needed to sprint for the jungle. Once inside that dense vegetation, pursuit would be difficult. It could give them a 100-meter head start. The plan crystallized with brutal simplicity. Wait for the midday meal, work their hands free. On signal, rush the door, grab weapons, and fire to suppress the guards. Run for the tree line and disappear. Then they would have to survive in the wild, heading west toward Thailand, roughly 150 kilometers through unmapped hostile jungle. The odds were terrible. Both men were starved and diseased. Neither had shoes. The jungle was filled with threats beyond the human. The terrain was vertical, and the rivers were swollen by monsoon rains. They had no map, compass, or supplies. Recapture would mean torture and certain death. Failure at any stage meant death. But staying meant a guaranteed execution within weeks. The guards had already made that decision. Dengler's choice was only about how to die, as a prisoner on his knees or as a free man running toward a sliver of hope. For Dengler, the German immigrant who had become a Navy pilot against all odds, surrender was psychologically impossible. His entire identity demanded resistance. It demanded he try. Martin reached the same conclusion. They were American warriors. They had families and service records that said they fought, not submitted. The despair that had nearly consumed them burned away in the face of this deadline. They would escape or die trying. The plan was set. They needed only the right moment. Lying in the darkness, hands bound, body aching from the stocks, Dengler felt something he hadn't experienced since his shoot-down: control. He was no longer a thing being done to, he was an operator with a mission. The mission was desperate, but it was his. The passive victim was gone. The fighter had returned. Days passed. Dengler and Martin worked their bindings each night, perfecting their technique. They studied the guards, confirming patterns, waiting for the optimal day. They needed clear weather so the jungle would provide cover but not be impassable. They needed all 7 guards present to create maximum confusion. The commitment was absolute. Escape was no longer a fantasy, it was the mission. Dengler felt a sharpness returning to his thoughts that starvation couldn't dull. His body was failing, but his mind was alive, tactical and focused. He was a pilot executing his escape and evasion plan. Martin felt it too. Their exchanged looks needed no words. They were ready. The breaking point had broken them free from passive suffering and into active resistance. Whatever came next, they would face it on their feet. The monsoon rain drummed on the roof as the guards talked about their villages and the rice harvest, oblivious that their prisoners had stopped waiting to die. Dengler's eyes tracked every movement, refining the plan. 3 weeks, the guards had said. He would not wait 3 weeks. The time for action was now measured in days, perhaps hours. Dieter Dengler was done being a prisoner. He was a pilot executing his escape, and nothing would stop him from trying. Chapter 4: The Arsenal of Desperation. The jungle pressed against the bamboo walls, a living thing waiting to swallow them whole. Dengler sat in the darkness of the prison hut, hands bound, feet locked in crude wooden stocks. His skeletal fingers worked the nail he'd hidden in a floor crack. 3 weeks of observation had brought him to this moment, confirming his belief that humans, even guards, followed patterns. They ate at the same time, stacked weapons in the same corner, and grew lazy in the monsoon heat. Confident that starving pilots posed no threat, the decision to escape came from watching Fisit Intharathat die. The Thai prisoner had simply stopped eating, and the guards dragged his body out like garbage. Dengler counted the remaining prisoners, himself and Dwayne Martin, American pilots, YC-2, a Chinese engineer, Jean de Bruin, a civilian pilot, and 2 Thais, Fisit Indradat and Prasit Promsuwan. 6 men against an entire Pathet Lao village. Starvation would kill them all within weeks. The jungle might kill them in days, but the jungle gave them a chance. Martin was the first Dengler approached. Both were Navy pilots who knew what happened to prisoners in Laos. While the North Vietnamese sent POWs to Hanoi, the Pathet Lao let men rot. Here, there was no Geneva Convention, no Red Cross, no one who even knew where they were. During a work detail hauling water, guards meters away, Dengler's voice was barely audible. The weapons are always in the same place. Martin's eyes flicked to the corner where 3 M1 carbines and a submachine gun leaned against bamboo, then back to Dengler. A slight nod. That was the entire conversation. 2 days later, Martin whispered during the evening meal, "When?" Dengler replied, "Soon." YC-2 came next. The Chinese prisoner had engineering skills and steady hands. Dengler had seen him fashion a crude spoon from bamboo during a guard's inattention, exactly the kind of mind they needed. During the daily walk to the latrine, Dengler told him, "We're leaving soon." YC's face remained blank, but his breathing changed. "How many?" 3, Dengler told him. "Maybe more." YC considered this for 5 seconds. "Count me in." He understood the calculation. Probable death was better than certain. De Bruin, the civilian pilot, was harder, older, weaker. He'd been here nearly 3 years, since being shot down on a food drop flight in 1963. Dengler needed his knowledge of the guards, who might hesitate, who would shoot first. They spoke one night in whispered Lao. "I've tried before," De Bruin responded slowly. "They caught me within 2 days." Dengler pressed. "How many were you?" De Bruin admitted, "Alone." There was the difference. Dengler promised that they would stay together. After a full minute of silence, De Bruin agreed. The two Thai prisoners, Fisit Indradat and Prasit Promsuwan, completed the group. They spoke Lao and understood the region. Indradat was a young Royal Lao soldier, Promsuwan older and calculating. Both agreed immediately. They understood the odds. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Seize the guards' weapons during their midday meal, kill anyone who resisted, and run before reinforcements arrived from the main camp 4 kilometers away. Survival depended on a 30-minute head start. Dengler had tracked sun positions obsessively. Their route was south-southwest toward Thailand, 100 kilometers of mountains and triple canopy jungle. They would have no food, no water containers, no map, just rifles, ammunition, and the hope of friendly villages in that green hell. Preparation meant tiny, compounded risks. The nail became Dengler's obsession. He'd found it in a floorboard, worked it loose, and hidden it in a crack reachable with his hands bound. At night, locked in the stocks, 2 boards pinning their ankles with a wooden peg, he practiced. The nail, shaped against stone, could work the peg loose, 10 minutes of careful work in the dark. He practiced nightly for 2 weeks until the motion was silent and quick. Food hoarding was nearly impossible on 2 daily handfuls of rice. After 5 days of trying, Dengler and Martin had hidden enough to fill a single palm. They gave up. They would run on adrenaline until it ran out. Physical preparation seemed absurd. Dengler's ribs showed, his legs wasted muscle, and walking to the latrine left him breathless. Still, every night, he and Martin tensed their remaining muscles in the dark, a futile ritual fueled by the single word that kept them going. Probably. The close call came on June 23rd. A guard Dengler nicknamed Little Hitler launched a surprise morning inspection, systematically kicking through the hut. Dengler's hidden nail and the meager rice balls were inches from discovery. His heart hammered against his ribs. As Little Hitler crouched, his hand reaching toward a debris pile, YC, to suddenly groaned and collapsed. The guards spun toward him. Little Hitler rushed over, shouting and kicking YC's prone form. The 40-second distraction worked. The guard forgot the inspection, declared YC a malingerer, and stormed off. Later, a look of acknowledgement passed between Dengler and YC. The engineer's quick thinking had saved them. The close call moved their timeline up. Waiting was too dangerous. Dengler chose June 29th, banking on the guards being distracted by a new, badly beaten prisoner, a pattern he had observed before. Their moment would be the midday meal. On the 28th, he taught the others a trick he'd discovered. Flexing their wrists while being tied gained enough slack to work free in about 5 minutes. The sequence was set. 5 minutes of work, hands free, then the stocks, then the weapons, then killing. The thought of killing up close, not the impersonal act of aerial combat, hung over Dengler. He pushed it away. These guards had starved and beaten them, laughed as men died. It was self-defense. That night, no one slept. Dengler lay awake, running through the endless list of what-ifs, each ending in failure, torture, and death. He accepted it. Death was coming either way. Better to meet it on his feet. June 29th arrived with suffocating monsoon heat. The morning work detail hauling firewood confirmed Dengler's prediction. The guards were distracted, discussing the new prisoner. At 12:17 by Dengler's internal count, 7 guards gathered for their meal. The camp commander was absent. Perfect. They sat in a circle 20 meters away, rice bowls steaming, conversation loud and relaxed. None watched the prisoners with any real attention. Dengler's hands were already working the rattan bindings. Beside him, Martin did the same. Across the hut, YC was already free, holding still. 3 minutes passed. Dengler's right hand slipped free, then his left. He held the pose, hands behind his back, as if still bound. One by one, the others freed themselves. 6 men unbound, while the guards ate and laughed. Dengler met each man's eye. The signal was simple. He moved, they followed instantly. Hesitation meant death. His heart pounded. His mouth was desert dry. Adrenaline, fear, and months of starving captivity focused into this single point in time. The guards were 15 meters away, the weapons 12. Dengler took one slow breath and released it. He lunged to his feet, stock still attached, and kicked backward. The bamboo wall splintered. He drove through it, the stocks breaking away as he hit the ground and rolled up in one motion. Behind him, the others exploded through the wall. Dengler and Martin sprinted right towards the weapon corner. YC and De Bruin went left for the guards' personal rifles. The Thais ran for the submachine gun. The guards looked up into chaos. As one started to rise, Dengler's hands closed on an M1 carbine. He swung it up. No time to aim, just point and fire. The shot hit the rising guard in the chest. Martin grabbed the second rifle and shot another guard lunging for his weapon point blank. Visit Indradat had the submachine gun, firing a wild burst that stitched across a third guard reaching for his holster. 3 down in 5 seconds. The remaining guards scattered, one diving for cover, one frozen in shock, 2 running for the main camp to raise the alarm. Dengler shot the frozen one. Squeeze trigger, man falls, find next target. The guard behind the hut blind fired around the corner, bullets cracking past Dengler's head. Martin put 2 rounds through the bamboo. The firing stopped. The 2 runners had reached to the camp edge shouting. Gongs and voices erupted. Time was gone. Move! Dengler shouted. Martin was already running south for the jungle wall. YC and De Bruin followed. The Thais broke west. Their choice, their chance. Dengler fired twice more toward the main camp, then turned and sprinted after Martin. His legs were rubber and lightning. 70 meters to the jungle. Bullets snapped through the air, panicked and poorly aimed. 50 meters. Dengler's lungs burned. 40. Martin crashed into the undergrowth ahead. 30. Shouts rose behind them, orders being screamed. 20. YC vanished into the green wall. 10. Dengler dove through elephant grass taller than his head, thorns ripping his skin as he drove deeper into the darkness. Behind him, the village erupted. Whistles, gongs, men shouting. Somewhere to his right, a wounded Dwayne Martin crashed through the undergrowth, running on adrenaline and terror. Dengler pushed through wait-a-minute vines that tore his arms bloody, ducking under moss, splashing through a stream without pause. Every breath was fire, every step a miracle. The jungle swallowed him whole. 50 meters in, he paused to orient. Distant gunfire. He gripped the M1, 15 rounds left, plus an ammo belt. Martin's crashing sounds had faded. They would link up later, or they wouldn't. Survival now was speed, distance, and the desperate hope that the Pathet Lao trackers were slow. Dengler turned south-southwest, toward Thailand, toward freedom. His skeletal legs carried him forward, deeper into green darkness. Behind him, 3 guards lay dead. Ahead lay everything. He ran. Chapter 5. The Green Hell. Escape was not freedom. It was merely a different kind of prison. The metal bars of the cage were gone, replaced by a living prison of suffocating green, a formidable enemy that was everywhere and nowhere at once. Dengler and Martin, severely weakened by months of starvation and torture, began their desperate flight with no map, no compass, and only a single handful of rice they had managed to steal. Every waking moment was a battle. They were pursued relentlessly by Pathet Lao patrols and hunted by villagers, incentivized by rewards. Their feet, unprotected, were shredded into a pulp of raw flesh by the serrated edges of rocks and unseen bamboo spikes hidden in the leaf litter. They were covered in leeches that gorged on their precious blood, tormented by swarms of insects that raised welts on their skin, and their bodies were racked with alternating chills and fever. They subsisted on foraged plants they could not identify and gulped down murky river water, their minds constantly slipping towards the precipice of delirium. To evade the patrols that stuck to the trails, they decided to travel downriver, clinging to the desperate hope that they could reach the Mekong River and float into the relative safety of Thailand. They lashed together a small, crude raft, a testament to their fading hope. It was a futile effort. The jungle's fury manifested in a series of brutal rapids that quickly destroyed their creation, tearing it to kindling and washing away their only rifle, their last tool of defense and survival. Any remaining hope sank with it into the churning brown water. The jungle was winning. After nearly 3 weeks, their desperate journey together came to its tragic end. Martin, his body ravaged by dysentery and fever, collapsed first. His system, pushed beyond all human limits, simply quit. Dengler, himself a walking skeleton, tried to pull him upright, but Martin's legs, devoid of muscle, wouldn't support him anymore. They had been wading through a shallow stream, using the water to mask their tracks, when Martin pitched forward, face first into the weak current. Dengler, reacting on instinct, caught him just before he drowned. Martin's skin burned with an intense fever. His eyes, unfocused, rolled back in his head. With his own muscles screaming in protest, Dengler dragged him to the muddy bank. Every fibre of his being demanded rest, but he knew that rest meant death. The Pathet Lao patrols were never more than hours behind them. Dengler could sometimes hear their voices echoing through the thick canopy, or the distinctive crack of AK-47s fired into the air, a chilling tactic to intimidate villagers into cooperation. He lowered Martin into the shade of a massive teak tree and was forced to make a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. They had to separate. Martin was dying, slipping in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherently about his family back in Seattle. It was the most brutal calculation of Dengler's life. If he stayed, they would both be recaptured or killed. If he left, one of them had a chance. The logic was sound, but the guilt was a physical weight, threatening to anchor him to the spot. Martin might be found by villagers who would turn him over to the Pathet Lao for a reward, but he would receive some form of care, and at least one of them might make it out alive. With a heavy heart, Dengler pressed the last handful of their stolen rice into Martin's limp palm and whispered a promise to send help, a promise he wasn't sure he could ever keep. Then he stood, his vision swimming with black spots from exhaustion, and stumbled back into the oppressive green of the jungle, utterly alone. The guilt threatened to crush him, but an primal survival instinct kept his legs moving. His body had become a machine, running on something beyond conscious will. His feet were raw meat, wrapped in rotting strips torn from his prison uniform. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandages with every agonizing step. Leeches clustered at his ankles, fat and black, gorging themselves. He no longer possessed the energy to pull them off. The jungle pressed in from all sides, a living, breathing wall of green that seemed malevolently designed to kill him. Sharp thorns caught his skin, tearing long gashes. Hidden vines snaked around his ankles, tripping him constantly. The unbroken canopy blocked out the sun, leaving him perpetually disoriented, moving by pure instinct toward what he prayed was west, toward Thailand, toward salvation. Every sound was a potential threat. The snap of a twig underfoot froze him in place. The distant bark of a dog sent a spike of ice through his veins. He now moved only during the day, too weak and disoriented to risk travel at night, gambling that the Pathet Lao patrols would stick to established trails while he painfully carved his own path through the densest undergrowth. It was a desperate, dangerous calculation. His mind began to fracture under the strain. He saw his mother in the trees, her form woven from leaves and light, calling to him in German. He saw his childhood home in the Black Forest materialize in misty clearings, a cruel mirage that would dissolve the moment he blinked. Hunger had moved beyond simple pain into something else entirely, a hollow, gnawing emptiness that made his thoughts drift like smoke. He chewed on bitter leaves and tree bark, swallowed handfuls of mud from streams, anything to give his stomach the illusion of food. On what he estimated was the 21st day of his so-called freedom, Dengler reached a river wider than any he had yet crossed. The current moved fast and deep, swollen by recent monsoon rains. On the far bank, visible through the swirling mist, he could see what looked like cleared land. Possibly cultivation, possibly a village, possibly Thailand. He had no way to know for sure. His exhausted body made the decision for him. He waded in. The water was shockingly cold, and the current was far stronger than it appeared. Within seconds, it swept his feet out from under him. Dengler fought to keep his head above the surface, his arms flailing uselessly as the river carried him downstream. It smashed him against submerged rocks and logs, filling his mouth and lungs with foul brown water. Driven by a pure animal survival instinct, he clawed desperately toward the far bank. His hand caught a gnarled root protruding from the mud. He held on with the last ounce of his strength, pulled himself inch by painful inch onto the muddy shore, and collapsed, unconscious. Back at the camp, the manhunt for the two Americans had become an obsession. The camp commandant, a ruthless cadre officer named Baunma, stood in the empty barracks where Dengler and Martin had slept, his face a rigid mask of controlled fury. The escape was a personal and professional humiliation, making him look incompetent in front of his superiors in the Pathet Lao command structure. Officers who allowed American pilots to escape did not receive promotions. They often received bullets. Baunma kicked over the wooden platform where Dengler had slept as if the inanimate boards themselves had betrayed him. His guards stood at rigid attention, their faces etched with terror. Two had already been beaten unconscious for their failure to detect the escape during the night watch. The remaining prisoners, De Bruin, Prasit, and the others, knelt in the courtyard with their hands bound tightly behind their backs, their faces pressed into the filthy mud. They would stay there until someone confessed how the escape had been planned. Baunma walked among them slowly, his heavy boots squelching in the mud just inches from their faces. No one spoke. De Bruin had his own suspicions about how Dengler had managed it, but he would die before confirming anything to his captors. The commandant's orders were simple and absolute. Every available guard would join the search. Villages within a 50-kilometer radius would be offered substantial rewards for any information leading to the Americans' capture. The reward was not just a windfall in this war-ravaged land. It was the difference between a season of hunger and a measure of security. Dead or alive, the Americans had to be found. The Pathet Lao could not afford to let word spread that escape from their camps was possible. Other prisoners might try, other camps might face rebellions. Baunma deployed his resources with chilling precision. Radio messages went out to regional command posts, threatening dire consequences for failure. Patrol boats were dispatched along every navigable river, their engines a constant menacing drone in the valleys. 3 separate search teams, each comprising a dozen soldiers and expert civilian trackers, fanned out from the camp in the direction scouts had determined the escapees most likely travelled. The trackers were local tribesmen, men who could read the jungle like Americans read newspapers. They found the crushed undergrowth where 2 men had crawled. They found specks of dried blood on bamboo shoots. They found the smashed remains of Dengler and Martin's pathetic raft. For the first week, the trail was clear. Then the monsoon rains came in earnest, washing away footprints and swallowing all traces. At a village near the Zay Kong River, a tracker found a farmer who reported seeing 2 emaciated white men stumbling through his cassava field 6 days earlier. The farmer had hidden, too frightened to confront them. He pointed northwest. The patrol moved faster, energized by the fresh lead. The dogs pulled hard at their leashes, noses to the ground, following scent traces invisible to human senses. Baunma accompanied this patrol personally, driven by a burning need to return the Americans to captivity himself. He carried a Soviet-made radio, receiving hourly updates from the other search teams. Nothing, no sign. Then, on the 19th day of the search, a villager arrived at a Pathet Lao outpost near the Laos-Thailand border, carrying news that made Baunma's heart race. A sick American had been found near a river. It was Martin. Dengler regained consciousness on the riverbank to the feeling of the sun burning his face. He had no idea how long he had been unconscious, hours, maybe an entire day. His body refused to move. Every muscle had seized into cramping, unbearable agony. He lay in the mud, staring up at the sky through the gaps in the canopy, watching clouds drift past. For a long moment he considered simply staying there, letting the jungle finish what the Pathet Lao had started. Then he heard the sound that jolted him back to desperate awareness. Voices, human voices speaking Lao, coming closer. Dengler rolled onto his stomach, agony screaming through his ribs, and began crawling towards the tree line. His arms and legs moved with agonizing slowness, each movement a separate, monumental act of will. The voices grew louder. Through the undergrowth, he could see them now. 3 men, local villagers by their dress, carrying farming tools. They walked along the riverbank, talking casually, completely unaware that a dying American pilot lay 15 meters away. Dengler froze, pressing himself flat into the mud and rotting leaves. His breathing seemed impossibly loud. His heart hammered so hard against his ribs he was certain they could hear it. The men stopped. One pointed towards the exact spot where Dengler had pulled himself from the river. The fresh drag marks in the mud were impossible to miss. They moved towards the tracks, studying them with the careful attention of people who had been explicitly told to watch for strangers. One of them carried a long, sharp machete. Another unslung an old bolt-action rifle from his shoulder. Dengler could see the reward calculation happening in their minds. He had perhaps 30 seconds before they followed the drag marks directly to his hiding spot. He couldn't run. His body had nothing left. He couldn't fight. The only option was to remain absolutely motionless and pray they somehow overlooked him. The man with the machete stepped closer, 5 meters away. 4 meters. 3. He was looking directly at the jumble of undergrowth where Dengler lay, the machete raised, ready to hack through the vegetation. Dengler's vision narrowed to a tunnel. This was how it ended. Then a sound shattered the moment. A large bird erupted from the trees to their right with a harsh, grating cry. The 3 men spun toward the sound, startled. In that single instant of distraction, a passing cloud moved across the sun, plunging the riverbank into deep shadow. The man with the machete hesitated, squinting into the sudden dimness. He lowered his blade slightly and said something to his companions. One of them laughed nervously. They stood for another agonizing minute, debating what to do, then slowly turned back towards the trail they had been following. Dengler didn't breathe, didn't blink. He watched as the men walked away, their voices fading back into the jungle. When he finally allowed himself to draw breath, his lungs burned as if on fire. He lay in the mud for another hour, making certain they were truly gone, before dragging himself deeper into the jungle. Inches. He had been inches from recapture. The jungle had saved him through sheer random chance. A bird, a cloud. But luck was a finite resource, and Dengler knew his was running out. He forced himself upright and kept moving, his goal simple and impossibly distant. Reach Thailand before his body gave out completely. How far was the border? 5 kilometers? 50? It didn't matter. He would move until he could not move anymore. The sun climbed toward its zenith, and the jungle steamed with suffocating humidity. Dengler's vision blurred and cleared in waves. He saw aircraft contrails high in the sky, American jets heading toward targets in North Vietnam, and tried to signal them with the last tattered scrap of his prison shirt, waving it frantically. They didn't see him. They never saw him. The white lines faded, leaving him alone once more. By late afternoon, Dengler's legs buckled for the final time. He collapsed in a small clearing beside a stream, too weak to go another step. His body had finally consumed itself, burning through muscle for fuel until nothing remained but bone and a flicker of will. Now the will was failing too. He crawled to the stream and drank, then lay back on the damp ground, staring blankly at the canopy. Birds moved in the branches, insects hummed, the jungle breathed around him, utterly indifferent to whether he lived or died. Then A sound cut through the drone of insects, faint but unmistakable. A rhythmic chopping, a mechanical pulse entirely alien to this world of leaf and vine. At first, he thought it was his own heart, a final percussive rebellion. But it grew louder, resolving into the familiar, beautiful, impossible sound of helicopter rotors. Stumbling upon a small, seemingly empty village, Dengler and Martin were spotted. A villager emerged, swinging a machete. Dengler watched in horror as his friend Dwayne Martin was struck down and decapitated. Fueled by adrenaline, Dengler scrambled back into the jungle, now completely alone. For days, he wandered in a hallucinatory state, his body a map of pain. He used his last matches on signal fires no one saw. He survived an encounter with a massive snake. Finally, after 23 days of solo survival, he collapsed in a clearing and used his last strength to arrange white parachute cloth in an SOS pattern. By a sheer miracle, U.S. Air Force pilots Eugene Dietrich and his crewman, flying an A-1 Sky Raider, the same type of plane Dengler had flown, spotted the signal. Initially unsure if it was a trap, they swooped low enough to see a skeletal figure waving feebly. Dengler lies in the clearing, his body a mere 85 pounds. The white parachute cloth spells SOS barely visible through the canopy. Above, the A-1 Sky Raider circles. Its engine penetrates the fog in his brain. He knew that sound intimately, having flown missions in the same aircraft. The irony cut through his delirium. Rescue might come in the very plane that brought him to this war. The Sky Raider banks away and Dengler's heart drops. They think it's a trap. He knew the caution. North Vietnamese and Pathet Lao forces regularly faked signals to ambush rescue helicopters. To Dietrich and his crewmen, the white cloth and motionless figure could easily be bait for guns hidden in the tree line. The A-1 gains altitude. Dengler watches it climb, unable to stand, wave, or scream over the engine noise. His last matches were gone. The parachute cloth was his final card. If they leave, he dies here. The Sky Raider circles back, lower this time. Dietrich decides to risk one more pass. Something about the still exposed figure bothered him. If this was a trap, it was poorly conceived. He drops to treetop level. The jungle canopy rushes beneath. The clearing, the cloth, and then movement. An arm lifts, barely, then falls back. A skeletal hand makes a small gesture. That movement was everything. No Pathet Lao soldier could fake such authentic weakness. No ambush used a man that emaciated as bait. Dietrich recognized what he was seeing. American, alive, barely. Dengler hears the engine note change. The Sky Raider is staying. He tries to move again and his right arm responds, waving inches off the ground. The effort exhausts him. He stares up as the aircraft circles twice, then climbs and heads east. Dengler knows the procedure. The A-1 cannot land. It can only mark the position and call for rescue helicopters. He has perhaps 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours. He can only pray the choppers come before dark, before they can't find this clearing again, before Pathet Lao patrols reach him first. As the Sky Raider's engine fades, jungle sounds return. Birds, insects, his own ragged breathing. Dengler fights to stay conscious. If he passes out, they might not see him. He focuses on the pain. His feet are masses of infection. His ribs show through paper-thin skin. His face is an unrecognizable mask of filth and sunken features. He looks at his skeletal hands, the hands of a corpse, but they still move. He curls and uncurls his fingers. This small motion proves he is alive. He will keep moving his fingers until the helicopters come or he dies. Time becomes elastic. He thinks of Martin, of the machete descending and the finality of a head separated from its body. Martin had made it 23 days, only to die 10 feet from what looked like safety. The village had appeared empty, a chance for food. Instead, a villager saw 2 skeletal strangers and reacted with immediate violence. Dengler just ran, propelled by pure survival instinct, crashing through the jungle. The villager didn't pursue. Perhaps one dead American was enough. A new sound comes from the west. Helicopter rotors. Dengler's heart accelerates dangerously. He tries to sit up, but his muscles fail. Rolling onto his side, he pushes up on a trembling elbow, which gives out, and he collapses. The rotor sound grows louder. They're coming, but the sun has shifted, and he's lying in shadow, no longer in the bright spot of his signal. He must move into the light. He must be visible. Digging his elbows into the dirt, he pulls his body forward inches at a time, his shoulders screaming. The rotor sound is directly overhead now. He's in shadow. They won't see him. Dengler screams, but the sound is a barely human rasp, lost in the roar. He pulls with his elbows again, harder. Something tears in his shoulder, 2 feet from the sunlit patch. One more pull. His right elbow collapses, and his face hits the dirt. The rotor wash hits the clearing, and the parachute cloth, his signal, lifts and tumbles away into the trees. He has only his body now. He rolls onto his back, using the momentum to sit partially upright, and gets his right arm up to wave. The movement is tiny, pathetic, but it's there, a vertical white stick against the green jungle. The helicopter passes overhead and continues east. Dengler's arm falls. They missed him. Then the helicopter banks and comes back, lower. The rotor wash flattens the vegetation, the wind of American machines on his face carrying the smell of aviation fuel. He begins to cry, but no tears come from his dehydrated body. His chest heaves with dry sobs. The helicopter hovers 15 feet above the clearing, too small to land safely. A crew member appears in the open door, looking down at him. Dengler raises his arm again. The crew member turns, shouts into the cabin, then turns back, points at Dengler and gives a thumbs up. They descend carefully, the skids touching vegetation at the clearing's edge. The crew member jumps out, running toward Dengler in a crouch as the rotor wash hammers everything flat. He reaches Dengler and stops, his expression of shock, horror and disbelief visible even through the chaos. This is what rescue looks like when you find a man who should be dead. The crewman kneels, shouting something Dengler can't hear, and pulls out a canteen. He lifts Dengler's head gently, tipping water into his mouth. Dengler chokes, coughs, but swallows. The water hits his stomach like a stone, and he retches, but nothing comes up. The crewman tries again with a smaller amount. This time, Dengler keeps it down. 2 more crew members arrive with a rescue litter. They position it beside him, hesitating before touching his fragile frame. Finally, they slide hands under his shoulders and legs and lift. He weighs almost nothing. They place him on the litter, the straps hanging loose on his emaciated body. The crew member who gave him water leans close, shouting in his ear, "You're safe. We've got you. You're going home." Dengler nods, speechless. The crewman's face shows tears. The sight had broken the composure of a combat veteran. They lift the litter toward the helicopter. After 23 days of crawling, other people are carrying him. American hands, safe hands. They slide the litter inside and secure it. One crewman wraps a blanket around him despite the heat, a gesture of pure compassion. The first rescuer sits beside him, a hand on his shoulder. Contact, presence. You're not alone anymore. The helicopter lifts. Below, the jungle canopy, his prison and crucible, shrinks away. The helicopter banks west toward Thailand, toward medical care, food and safety. Dengler watches the solid green pass beneath, and the guilt begins. He escaped, Martin didn't. Fissett, Toe, and the others were still there. The crewman misinterprets his expression. "It's okay. You made it," he says, squeezing his shoulder. Dengler wants to explain his complex feelings, but the words won't come. He closes his eyes, feeling the helicopter's vibration through his bones, the first gentle touch he's felt in 6 months. The 45-minute flight is a blur of medical care. The crewman checks his thready pulse and pulls an emergency kit to start an IV. The first vein collapses. The second attempt is a success. Saline drips into his bloodstream as the crewman, trained for this, carefully monitors the flow. knowing too much fluid could be fatal. The helicopter descends over a Thai military base, American flags, buildings, order, civilization. The landing pad rushes up and medical personnel run toward them with a stretcher. Seeing Dengler, their professional composure slips for a moment before training takes over. They transfer him gently and carry him toward a field hospital. Inside, doctors and nurses swarm. They cut away his rags and catalogue his injuries: malnutrition, dehydration, infected wounds, probable dysentery, and malaria. Extensive dental and vision damage. His weight is confirmed, 85 pounds. He has lost nearly half his body mass. The doctors exchange looks. This is extreme even by their standards. They begin treatment protocols: more IVs, antibiotics, and careful feeding through a nasogastric tube. An intelligence officer appears, notebook in hand. He needs information: camp locations, guard routines, other prisoners. Dengler's mind keeps slipping, but he describes the camp, its coordinates, the 7 Americans. The officer writes quickly. This is actionable gold. Dengler's voice is a whisper as he describes the torture. When he gets to Martin's death, the villager, the machete, the headless body, his voice breaks completely. The officer's hand tightens on his pen. Martin's death will be recorded. The debriefing ends after 20 minutes. Dengler is too exhausted. "You did good, Lieutenant," the officer says. "This information will help the others." Dengler nods, wanting to believe his escape meant something more than his own survival. As the officer leaves, nurses dim the lights. He tries to sleep, but behind his eyelids the jungle remains. The bamboo cage, the guards, Martin's headless body. His mind is still in Laos. He sleeps eventually with the help of morphine. When he wakes, an American general is at his bedside. "Son, do you have any idea what you've accomplished?" the general asks in awe. "You survived what kills most men." Dengler feels only failure. For Martin, for the others. The general understands. "You gave us intelligence that will save lives. You proved escape is possible. You gave hope to every man still in captivity. That matters." He places a purple heart on Dengler's blanket. "More will follow, but this one is for what you endured." He salutes. Dengler's arm barely moves, but he tries to return it. He looks at the medal, feeling its weight, of meaning, of sacrifice, of survival. Through the window, American flags snap in the wind. His war of immediate survival is over. The scars will remain, the nightmares are just beginning, but he is free. Against all odds, against all reason, free. Night falls on the quiet hospital. Dengler lies awake, listening to the mundane sounds of safety: footsteps, quiet conversation, beeping equipment. He will learn to trust these sounds, to believe the nightmare is over. For now, he simply exists in this moment, alive, rescued, safe, the impossible made real. Chapter 7. The Ghost Who Flew. The rescue itself was harrowing. A helicopter hoisted the emaciated Dengler, who weighed only 98 pounds, into the sky. His rescuers were shocked. They thought they were picking up a half-dead Viet Cong soldier until the glare of the sun off the wedding ring on his finger identified him as an American. Back at Da Nang, doctors were incredulous that he was a pilot who had survived a crash, torture, 6 months of captivity, and a 23-day ordeal in the jungle after escaping. His recovery was long and painful, but his spirit proved unbreakable. Dieter Dengler became one of only a handful of American servicemen to escape a POW camp during the Vietnam War and live. His story was a testament to an indomitable will forged in post-war Germany and tested in the Laotian jungle. He returned to flying, but the jungle never truly left him, a constant reminder of the price of freedom. The debriefing lasted 4 days, with intelligence officers filling 3 notebooks with Dengler's detailed recall of camp layouts, guard routines, interrogation techniques, and Pathet Lao supply routes. His hands still trembling from malnutrition, he sketched bamboo cage dimensions and detailed the daily rice ration schedule that had kept 7 men barely alive. One detail caught immediate attention. The camps were temporary, moved every few months to avoid detection. The coordinates he provided led to reconnaissance flights that photographed 2 similar facilities within a week. By August 1966, Navy intelligence had compiled a working map of the Pathet Lao prison network in northern Laos, built almost entirely from his memory of captivity. His Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism arrived 6 weeks later. The ceremony was brief. Dengler accepted the medal in a dress uniform tailored to his recovering frame and requested an immediate return to flight status. Doctors advised 6 months minimum. He was back in a cockpit in 4. His return to the USS Ranger was met with whispers. Fellow pilots knew the outline of his story: shot down, captured, escaped, but Dengler offered nothing more. He flew missions over North Vietnam through early 1967, transferred to test pilot duty, and took his discharge in 1968 with over 400 combat hours logged. The nightmares were relentless. His wife, whom he'd married before deployment, left him in 1971, unable to live with a man who woke screaming from visions of the jungle, who hoarded food in closets, and who was forbidden from explaining his ordeal by the classification documents he had signed. Dengler moved to California, worked as a civilian test pilot, and then opened a furniture refinishing business in Mill Valley. When people asked about his service, he mentioned flying. He never mentioned the camp. For 23 years, the story remained buried. Dengler's debriefing was classified secret, locked in Navy archives at the Washington Navy Yard. The justification was operational security. The United States had never officially acknowledged military operations in Laos, and Dengler's capture there complicated that diplomatic fiction. His escape provided crucial intelligence that informed ongoing silent operations, but publicly it couldn't exist. His Navy Cross citation vaguely mentioned his escape without naming the country. Post-war America wanted to forget Vietnam, and former POWs from the Hanoi Hilton, whose stories fit a clearer narrative of heroism and liberation, wrote bestsellers. Dengler's saga was messier. Held by America's undeclared enemy in an undeclared war, he had escaped rather than waited, killing guards and surviving on insects. It was a story the Navy didn't know how to tell, so for decades they didn't. Dengler honored his classification oath, attending no POW reunions and writing no memoir, even as the silence ate at him. In Mill Valley, Dengler worked long days refinishing antique furniture, his hands smoothing wood with the same methodical patience he'd used to loosen bamboo stakes years earlier. Neighbors knew him as a quiet, friendly man, oddly intense about punctuality, who always carried energy bars and refused to eat rice. No one connected the eccentric furniture refinisher with the classified file mouldering in Washington. The few who knew his full story, retired intelligence officers, former squadron mates who recalled the skeleton lifted from the jungle, seer instructors who received sanitized summaries, were scattered. His name appeared on no memorials. His ordeal merited no chapter in the official histories of Vietnam POWs. Dengler's incredible escape was reduced to a footnote in classified after-action reports. The rediscovery came, strangely, through Hollywood. In 1997, German filmmaker Werner Herzog, researching a film on obsession, learned of Dengler's background. With the classification finally lifted in 1989, Dengler, now 58 and fighting ALS, agreed to talk. Herzog took cameras to Laos, retracing the escape route for his documentary Little Dieter Needs to Fly. Audiences were stunned by the Vietnam POW story no one had heard, told by a dying man matter-of-factly describing his torture and survival in the very jungle that nearly killed him. The film won critical acclaim, but with limited distribution, the story remained largely on the fringe of public consciousness. A decade later, naval historian Bruce Henderson saw the documentary and was compelled to find the truth. After Dengler's death from ALS in 2001, Henderson spent 3 years using declassified files, Freedom of Information Act requests, and interviews with surviving personnel to piece together the full account. His 2010 book, Hero Found: The Greatest POW Escape of the Vietnam War, revealed the true extent of the actionable intelligence Dengler had provided, referenced in at least 19 separate reconnaissance missions, and how completely his contribution had been buried by the silent war in Laos. The book brought long overdue institutional recognition. Dengler's story now lives strongest in the military's SEER, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape community. The Navy added his ordeal to the curriculum, not as simple inspiration, but as a case study in preparation. Instructors teach his specific techniques, using river currents instead of fighting them, monitoring guards with peripheral vision, and keeping faith with fellow prisoners by sharing food, a vital example of the code of conduct. The lesson is that resistance is not always dramatic defiance. It is Dengler feigning catatonia, secretly marking guard schedules with charcoal. His story culminates in a single powerful message for students: readiness is a decision. Instructors frame the evasion block with a simple preface: you're in the worst situation you can imagine, and you have to decide if you're going to try. Then they tell of a 98-pound pilot who, seeing a plane, decided to try. He was rescued not by luck, but because he had stayed ready for the moment luck arrived. The decision to survive made months earlier kept him alive. The rest was execution. The rescue itself is honored annually in a small ceremony at the Museum of Aviation at Robbins Air Force Base, where pararescue jumpers, PJs, gather. They commemorate the 1966 Air Force Cross awarded to Lieutenant Eugene Dietrich, the pilot who spotted Dengler's SOS. Dietrich described seeing a scarecrow waving vegetation before realizing it was a desperate man. He dropped to 500 feet, drawing ground fire to confirm the signal and direct the rescue helicopter through hostile territory for 40 minutes. The attendees know Dietrich pulled a ghost from the jungle, a man declared missing and presumed dead. They also know that the ghost went back to flying. Dengler's military record shows he logged 73 more combat missions after returning to the USS Ranger. He never discussed why he went back, but squadron mates noticed he flew differently. The bravado was gone, replaced by calculated risk assessment and an obsessive intensity about bringing his wingman home. In one infamous incident, Dengler aborted a strike because his wingman reported a rough engine, escorting him back to the carrier before flying the mission solo. He was reprimanded for breaking protocol, but accepted it without defense. He had left men behind in the jungle once. He would not do it again. The furniture shop in Mill Valley closed in 1999 when ALS made it impossible for him to work. For 18 years, Dengler had built a reputation for meticulously restoring damaged pieces, making them whole again. The metaphor was obvious, though Dengler insisted he just liked fixing what seemed beyond repair. His final project was a dresser he spent 6 months on, working in short sessions as his strength failed. When the customer asked why he'd spent so long on it, Dengler spoke of preserving things built to last. He didn't mention that he learned patience in a bamboo cage, or that making broken things whole helped him sleep. Werner Herzog attended Dengler's funeral in February 2001. At the small service, the official eulogy mentioned his Navy Cross and love of flying, but not the jungle. Afterwards, Herzog offered a private reflection to those who remained. He spoke of Dengler's lesson, that true dignity is maintained despite circumstances not granted by them, and that Dieter had walked out of hell because he had decided the Pathet Lao could not take his humanity. The reflection was brief and unrecorded, but the dozen people who heard it remember. Today, Dengler's ordeal has a permanent, if modest, place in naval history. At the National Museum of Naval Aviation in Pensacola, a small display case holds his Navy Cross, the survival knife from his final mission, and the wedding ring that identified him as American to his rescuers. Nearby, on panel 23 of the Naval Aviation Monument, his name is carved among aviators of exceptional valor. The inscription is succinct: Escaped Captivity, Laos, 1966. Visitors, often historians or former pilots, stand before those 16 letters and consider all they don't say. The months of torture, the starvation, the deaths of the men who didn't make it, the deafening silence that followed. They consider the weight he carried, the man who returned to the sky because it was the one place the jungle couldn't seem to follow, and they consider that perhaps it followed him there anyway, a shadow he flew with for 35 years.